Hi everyone, my name is Shrouq Al Maghlouth and I am from Saudi Arabia. I have a PhD in linguistics and discourse analysis. Today I'll be sharing a paper examining the relationship between discourse and context, entitled Do You Mean What You Say? Do You Say What You Mean? Empowering Women at Work. The paper basically examines the discourse on social change as represented in gender-related posts on English blogs written by Saudi bloggers. In recent years, Saudi women have been empowered on a number of levels that were not readily available to them at the dawn of this century. In the last 2 decades or so, social change has been initiated, constructed, and distributed discursively in both governmental and non-governmental circles, with the topic of women's inclusion in unconventional work environments that extends beyond the work of health service and education, with this topic provoking controversial positions among the diverse society of Saudi Arabia. The current paper offers a critical discourse analysis on how these diverse positions, along with men and women as main social actors involved in these positions, have been constructed metaphorically in blog posts written by bloggers presenting themselves as supporters of change and women empowerment in Saudi Arabia. These posts were written between 2009 and 2011, thus documenting the very early stages of support for social change or opposition for social change. Please keep in mind that this is something written more than or almost 10 years ago. This has changed drastically recently, but the way they are presenting it is very informative in the sense that it documents that era and it shows how the initial measurements that were taken by the government at that time were actually constructed and presented in these blog posts. The subject of women empowerment, as I said, expanded drastically after King Salman, the current Saudi king, ascended to throne in 2015. In fact, many consider this current time to be the golden era for Saudi women. In February 2020, Riyadh, the capital city of Saudi Arabia, has been named the capital Arab women, which signifies the need for a thorough analysis like this one of how women's empowerment is portrayed in discourse. Again, within context like this, it's very important that we examine how we might actually want to say something, but we wind up saying something else. There are many situations that are presented in the literature of discourse analysis where you see that people actually have good intention, but the way they are presented might not support their good intention. And this is what we're going to examine today. Now, it's very important to start this discussion with an examination of what is discourse. This paper is actually based on a multi-level view of discourse, where discourse is being viewed as interrelated and interwoven within a wider phenomenon that involves both cognition and context. If you look at the figure in front of you, you're going to see that discourse here is actually quite influential because if it moves, it will move cognition and consequently context. But it would also be affected by these because again, the relationship between these three is very deep and very thorough, and they are actually contextually shaped by each other and at the same time being shaped by each other. This is why we view discourse in this particular regard as a contextually situated phenomenon with a dual take on discourse because it is being as both constitutive and constituted by social context. Now, this is an interactive view of discourse, and with such an interactive view of discourse, we see that discourse is actually strongly related to social change, and that's why it is very important for us as discourse analysts to examine how social change is actually aided or impeded by by discourse. Now, the way we're presenting discourse as a multi-level phenomenon requires approaching it with a critical perspective. Again, we see discourse as something that's quite influential, that's quite determining, and being determined by the social context. And that's why we need that critical aspect of discourse analysis and not just critical discourse analysis. For example, it's been stated that in the literature that critical discourse analysis should be viewed as an enterprise that should be approached as a committed science, interfering with the social practice rather than being dispassionate and objective. This is something you would expect your analysis to have. So if you are conducting a critical discourse analysis, which is abbreviated as CDA, henceforth, if you're conducting a CDA, you are expected to be actually an activist. You're not expected to be objective in the scientific sense. You're expected to take action. You're expected to have that commitment. You are expected actually to take part, to be involved in action. And that's why works like this could have a potential in changing along with the other things that go within the same social context. G, for instance, distinguishes between what we call descriptive discourse on the one hand and critical ones on the other. And it is actually the commitment vein on the critical discourse that takes on a special significance when it is coupled with work on gender discourse. Now, as you all may know, work on gender discourse is very rich, and topics like women empowerment, gender inequality, power and imbalance, all of these are very common in gender discourse, and many in the literature have actually examined how discourse may not be supportive, even if it claims to be. This is probably a common feature that's seen for women in different societies. So even where women are assumed to be in societies where they are empowered the most compared to other countries in this world, you're going to see that even within these situations or even within these contexts, women are still struggling with stereotypical perceptions, and they're still probably bound to degrading, stereotypical perceptions, and probably to work to earn less than men, to work probably the same thing like men but earn less, and to be faced in a position where they have the glass ceiling that they cannot break. For example, in a study by Al-Hijn in 2015, he conducted an examination of the semantic microstructures of women in the BBC coverage of Muslim women. Interestingly, he found that many of the constructions associated with the notion of hijab, which is the head veil for Muslim women, were actually quite negative, and women were represented as passive, as submissive, and the hijab was actually portrayed very negatively. This was in the BBC coverage. So again, this is a Western coverage that portrays women in a negative way, even if it claims to support them. Again, a similar thing is found in another study by At-Tuhami and Salama in 2019, where they actually examined the journalistic representation of Saudi women in the corpus of contemporary English in the United States. Now, again, they found similar findings where women were actually represented in stereotypical perception. They were represented as passive, as weak. Even the governmental attempts to actually empower women were rendered superficial and insignificant, and they were actually constructed using normalization. This is what we call in linguistic normalization, where you actually present things, even if they are good, you attempt to degrade them in context, to minimize their effects, even if they are quite influential in reality. Again, this corresponds to the stereotypical portrayals of women, and this is why it's very important to work on topics like the current one. Now, the current study is actually based on a number of theoretical aspects, and it is based on what we call the sociocognitive approach. As I said, this approach places cognition at the very heart of the relationship between discourse and context, and that's why it examines what we call mental representation and social representations. With mental representation and social representations, we are examining the cognitive constructs of entities or persons. So we're examining how people view change and how people view actually people involved in change. The way we are presenting it in the study, I am examining how it is constructed metaphorically. So I'm actually adopting two frameworks from conceptual metaphor analysis and from critical metaphor analysis. One of them is actually one of the pioneer works in the 80s and a more recent one from 2004. As I said, my data are from blog post. They were written about a decade, and they were documenting the very early stages. So when change was very subtle and moving very slowly. Later on, people actually moved away from blogging, and they started focusing on things like microblogging in Saudi Arabia, and Twitter became very popular, and then blogging in its regular form sort of died. Results of my study reveals four clusters, and I'm actually collecting the metaphorical examination in forms of clusters because I feel that the way presented as clusters allows us to see the patterns as they are happening repeatedly in my data. I'm also presenting an example with each one, but it's obvious in each cluster that the metaphorical expressions revolve around a number of conceptual metaphors. With the first cluster, it is borrowed from images from the world of movement. If you look at the example, it would be a shame if another door closes in the faces of women who are in desperate need of their jobs. This is from Post 19. And this particular cluster, you can see that change is actually constructed as a movement. And of course, there are so many other examples, but I'm just alluding to these to this quickly here. You will see that my data represent three metaphorical patterns: change is movement, career is a road, and career is a race. Similarly, with the second cluster, you are going to see images that are borrowed from the word of physical encounter. Again, this is an example from my data. The proposal was made by Jeddah Chamber of Commerce, who said they will keep pushing this proposal over the next 3 years. Here in this cluster, along with the other examples, of course, support is being represented as physical action. It's something that requires physical action. And change is represented as a crack. Change is represented as a crack. Disagreement also is represented as physical action. Disagreement is also represented as physical action. So again, support and disagreement to this support, both of these are represented as requiring a lot of work and a lot of effort on the part of supporters and opponents. And the fact that change is presented as a crack shows that it's actually very demanding and requires a lot of force. The third cluster is quite interesting because it was the one that was rather surprising. Let's keep in mind that these posts are actually written by bloggers who support women empowerment. So it was quite surprising for me to see them using metaphorical constructions that are not very empowering. That's because these constructions are actually very objectifying to women. Yes, they have good intention, but they are representing women as jewels. In other examples, they are presenting women as flowers. They're also representing men as wolves. Because they're representing men as wolves, they are actually presenting men as predators. Again, a very objectifying and depersonifying case. When men are represented as predator, women are actually portrayed as victims. By victimizing women, we are taking the power from them. We're presenting them as passive, as weaker than men. And that's why I find this very interesting, because maybe you can find this construction in probably discourse which is opposing change, but to find these constructions in discourse that claims to empower women was quite surprising. Um, let's keep in mind that many of these constructions are used a lot by opponents, so they shouldn't be transferred to the discourse which support or which attempts to empower women. When women are presented as such, maybe they don't rise up to the level where they should be in a position to actually demand change and be able to carry out change. The third or the fourth cluster is actually related to this, and it's actually based on a social construct in the Saudi society as a Middle Eastern society, which pays a lot of attention to honor, and it shows it as a clean cloth. Now, this represents honor as a very important value that needs to be protected, and women must be who are objectified and presented as valuable asset, but at the same time vulnerable, and they must be kept away and safe and hidden. They're also represented as having honor, which is again something very fragile that could be tarnished easily. So this goes along the same line, not very empowering to women. Um, these four clusters reveal two main findings, as I said. First, change is constructed cognitively as challenging and demanding. For both women who are aspiring to work in unconventional professions outside the world of medicine and care and education, as well as their supporters, whether these were the supporters who are decision makers, who can actually have authority in this, or supporters who are just regular bloggers like the one we're examining, who are just normal people who don't have authority. So on the part of all of these, we require action. Change is constructed as something very demanding. However, this clashes with the second finding, where women are actually portrayed metaphorically on these blogs as in a way that is objectifying and victimizing, which fails to be up to the level where they're expected to be in order to carry out this demanding change. This mismatch actually calls for a careful examination of how some constraining cognitive construction still persist and are distributed and unfortunately reproduced even within discourse attempting to empower women. Here emerges the key significance of interdisciplinary research, linking the fields of discourse and linguistics on one hand to fields like business and social studies on the others. And that's why it's very important that we pay attention to what we are saying. Maybe we have to be conscious about what we are saying and how we represent ourselves. Many studies actually reveal a lot of mismatch and a lot of cases where people claim to say one thing, but in reality, they say something else. Yes, maybe they have good intention, but their construction, their linguistic and cognitive constructions fail to support them. This is basically what I wanted to say. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you very much for listening to me. And please let me know if you have any comments. These are my references. Let me know if you have any comments or questions. I should be available on Zoom or Skype. Thank you very much.